welcome our panel.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. So I'm going to do a little bit more lengthier intros since everyone here has different backgrounds in blockchain and cryptocurrencies. I'll start from right to left, and that's how you go last. So Doug has been focusing on blockchain since 2013, so he was one of the first ones through his analysis on cryptocurrencies for a major asset management firm. He also led an initiative in Latin America introducing identity verification methods using blockchain technology. In 2017, he established a blockchain technology consulting firm. And Doug believes this technology, and by the way, I believe that too, will have a profound impact on the way anti-money laundering operations, economic sanctions compliance, supply chain management, and know your customer conventions are applied and maintained. Next to Doug, George Pesok, General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer of Taysen, a software development company headquartered in Wyoming that builds open source blockchain software. George is an Army veteran. He worked at Oric and other firms, and has represented technology companies, cryptocurrency exchanges, and financial institutions in administrative and enforcement matters before the SEC and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the DOJ. Now, to my left, Joe Rasinski, a futurist and public speaker. He focuses on technologies, cybersecurity, blockchain, artificial intelligence, and robotics, especially drone technology. He also writes about the future of technology in the legal sector, and under the umbrella of Thomson Reuters, Joe hosts a show called The Hearing, a legal podcast with a technology focus. He's also a mentor with Columbia Blockchain Accelerator. And last but not least, Daza Greenwood. He is the founder of Civics.com, a boutique consulting firm for legal technologies, automated transactions, data management, and technology strategy. He is also a researcher at the MIT Media Lab, focusing on the field of computational law and building the Law MIT EDU research portfolio. Daza has testified before the US House, the Senate, and other legislatures on electronic transactions law. And myself, your moderator, Nadia Gill, head of business strategy at cloud security at Google, over 20 years of experience with a specialization in blockchain and crypto. So we have a very packed agenda, but I want to stop for a moment for Doug to tell us a little bit about Chrysalis.
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Nadia, and thanks to Thomson Reuters for having us. Yeah, so Chrysalis is a new venture. I started with 3 other co-founders in June of 2021. We have created a token that trades on institutional exchanges for accredited investors as well as institutions. And it's a derivative product that represents the underlying value that's attached to inaccessible digital assets. For those of you who are familiar with asymmetric cryptography, if you lose your private key and only have your public key, you're pretty screwed. So we've created a product that represents that and trades. And one of our co-founders, Rula Saif, is an expert in quantum computing based in Stockholm, Sweden. So we're actually making our play towards that market as quantum computing matures to the point, probably within the next 8 years, when it's able to break asymmetric cryptography. So I know there's a lot there, but it's a new product. We just finished a seed funding round, very successful seed funding round, and hopefully moving into the A round very soon.
Thank you. And yes, thank you so much for Thomson Reuters and Alec Moore for having us here. As always, provider of unbiased content, top of innovation and market. So thank you for our host. Daza, let's start with you. Let's talk about the blockchain definition, because in case a lot of people or a few people here don't know about it. So why don't you walk us through that, and Joe will also help you as well.
Yes, thank you so much. I'd be happy to. So I think I'd promised to show some things on the screen, and here they come. Is the screen coming through?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I guess the first thing I want to just highlight with these definitions is, in law, of course, definitions are critical. So too with technology. But like everything, it always depends on so many factors. And one of the factors with respect to definitions of blockchain is, what aspect are we seeking to define? And it may be that different definitions are appropriate depending on that context. One major context, and I think it's the prevailing context here today, is governance and regulation of blockchain technologies and blockchain-enabled products and services and activities. There's another thing that's coming up, and it's major, and it's using blockchain and distributed ledger technologies for governance and regulation and other legal frameworks like contract-based consortia or networks and other legal instruments. So just bear that in mind. Actually, I will not talk about NFTs first. So the first thing to know about the legal definition of blockchain is there isn't one. There's not a single consensus legal definition of a blockchain or a smart contract or a distributed ledger. This is an area that is still coming together, and I think that's critical to know because depending on what the circumstances are, there may be definitions that are specifically applicable to your facts and kind of legal use cases. But in general, it's coming together, and I just added a smattering of bills that are before this Congress right now that have different definitions of blockchain. I think many of you may have heard of the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, which has this definition that focuses on the consensus aspects and the open source aspects, no need to license, and also the permissionless aspects. Okay. There's this bill, HR 5496, that focuses very much on the network, but also splits out what we mean by decentralized. And so in Section 3, they talk about decentralization of control, which is sort of a governance concept. So, we're splitting up the powers. You can think, checks and balances kind of stuff. And decentralization of the functions, the technical capabilities and functions of the network. These operate on two different axes. You could have a centrally governed decentralized network, in theory. I've seen some with decentralized computing. And you could have decentralized governance of an Oracle database or a very centralized network and database. So there's different dimensions of decentralization. There's more than these two. And that's critical to be aware of when forming or selecting a definition, knowing what to apply it to. Really interestingly is HR 5045, which I think is closest to the moment, and that's basically calling for the creation of a work group to recommend a definition of blockchain technology back to Congress and also the Department of Commerce and other places. That's probably the best state of affairs of where things are at in the United States. Let's dip down for a moment to Wyoming. So at the state level, there's been a lot of innovation in statutes. Incidentally, you'll notice I'm scrupulously avoiding SEC and CFTC and other regulatory bodies. I'm just sticking with statutes for the moment because, among other things, I'm operating in like an 8-minute window. So I hope others will, kind of fill in the gaps. But at the state level, there's been a lot of movement. Wyoming has been a leader with blockchain technology promoting legislation. And there's this fine, simple definition of that they've gotten. Interestingly, they've also defined a smart contract, which is critical when one starts to apply these definitions to systems. This definition of a smart contract is from the DAO LLC, the Decentralized Autonomous Organization LLC Act that the Wyoming governor signed into law last spring. in which I was somewhat involved in, that definition is changing. And so this is just a look under the hood of the drafting committee's most recent or second to most recent take on what we're looking to put forward through the appropriate select committee for amendments, because it turns out, as expected, perhaps didn't get it right the first time around, and there's some questions and ambiguity that people creating DAO LLCs would like to clarify. One of them I just will note is, does it matter most that the inputs to the smart contract creating one of these decentralized organizations are on a blockchain and are immutable? Does it matter most that the outputs of the DAO are encoded onto a blockchain? Does it matter most that every activity and decision that the decentralized organization took is verifiably committed to a blockchain, or some combination of those things? And depending on who's speaking at these drafting meetings, different things are important. But I just want to highlight one thing, if I may, which is, you might be wondering, did Daza just say a DAO LLC? Yeah, I did. I think the biggest news that perhaps we'll come to later when we talk about trends is, what does that mean for human control of legal entities, and how much can we rely on blockchains, as I mentioned earlier, to govern legal systems? Like a LLC is a mini legal system. It has governance. It has, impacts on the world. And there's a hot debate now over whether it's appropriate or actually necessary to have some human control over these blockchain systems when they are in a position to cause harm potentially. And if so, how? So we can perhaps come back to that later. But if I could close just by saying one theme, this is an active question. Oh, I'm sorry. The most important thing to close on is this. I have a recommendation, which is back in 2016, it seemed to me that it would be helpful to have a legal definition of a blockchain and a smart contract in legislation. And so used law.mit.edu as a convening place for some members of Congress and some industry groups and others, stakeholders, to basically do a crowdsourced engagement to ask vendors and academics and legislators and others who are thought leaders, how would you define blockchain or smart contract in statute? And then we held a little sort of informal meeting to look at all of the input we got in one of the hearing rooms in Congress in Rayburn. And basically the way we worked it is I just created a Google form or some kind of, I don't remember the form in 2016, but I created an open form. People said their definitions, we correlated them all, we circulated them, and that became the input for the meeting. 2016 was too early to, have Congress, define a blockchain or a smart contract in statute. 2022 and 2023 are not too early. So I just want to suggest groups like Thomson Reuters and other associations maybe want to try something like this with stakeholders and bar associations. And maybe it's time to get a lot of people's ideas on what the definitions ought to be, or what the different definitions for a blockchain or smart contract, based on whether it's a securities context or a governance context or a commercial context, ought to be, and see if we can help lawmakers and others to have common definitions that we can use going forward. So with that, I'm going to return the screen to the group, and I look forward to joining the rest of the conversation.
Thank you, Daza. So, Joe?
Excellent, Daza. Thank you so much for going through that. So I want to take a sort of a show of hands, really quick survey among all of you all. Who among you have cryptocurrencies right now, by show of hands? So I see for the people that are watching, probably 5 or 6 people. How about NFTs, those non-fungible tokens? How many people have those? So I see about 3 people. How many people had heard of a DAO before, that decentralized autonomous organization? Okay, good. That's very good, because it's very important going forward. All right, let's level set just a bit to make sure that we're all on the same page about some of this stuff. So I always like to talk about the history of this before we really launch into some of the other details that we'll certainly expand on. So 2008, 2009, we had a small financial crisis where, of course, you saw massive banks going under. We're like, what in the world? These organizations have been around for 120 years, and now they're gone overnight. You saw an organization like AIG on the precipice of also falling into the abyss if it were not for our federal government. Had a ripple effect across the entire world. Affected everyone. Massive issues, right? So this is where it gets a little bit weird. So a group of people, an individual, whatever the case is, known by Satoshi Nakamoto, came up with that white paper. This white paper is all of 10 pages long. So you can see it. I encourage everyone to always read this thing. It's bitcoin.org/bitcoin.pdf. It is transformative in the way that almost nothing else is. So we heard about AI before. Yes, AI is important and is transformative. I personally think this might have even more of an edge on that going forward. We shall see because of the things we're going to talk about. So what happened is they came out with this white paper because they saw these single points of failure. So banks going under, large organizations going under as well. And they said, what can we do to change the paradigm? Let's change this whole thing up. So instead of having these single institutions, single points of failure, let's have 10,000 computers, servers, nodes around the world that are all running the same software, they're secured, they're to use all sorts of things like consensus algorithms and mechanisms. They're gonna have security baked into that. And what that will do is allow me to prove that I'm going to send something to somebody else. In this instance, we're talking about Bitcoin, but it applies to way more than just that. From me to somebody else, they have a specific address, I have a specific address. When I click send, it could be in an app, it could be on your phone, whatever, it could be on your computer. It then goes out to a grouping of computers and it tries to confirm that that really should happen, that transaction actually should happen. This is transformative because now you have this decentralized model, which means that in the Bitcoin example, it goes around all the banks, it goes around all the government agencies. It's got cryptography that goes back to the 1980s, so it's sound, it's true, it's immutable. So once that stuff is up on this blockchain, and let me define it. In my simple mind, a blockchain is simply a database that's distributed. There's a lot of other nuances, but if someone were ever to say, oh, what's blockchain? What the heck is going on with this thing? That's fundamentally what we're talking about. But it's transformative because for Bitcoin, it's the underlying technology. Now, let's move aside from Bitcoin and talk about how this expands into everything else. So we heard from Daza, now that's gonna start to move into other areas too. So talk about NFTs, those non-fungible tokens. Well, yeah, we see that with art right now, but you're gonna see that within deeds to properties, to your car, to whatever it is that you have. An asset of ownership going forward is going to be represented by this digital token that'll be stored on a blockchain going forward. It is amazing transformative technology. Talking about DeFi, so decentralized finance, pulling everything off of what we currently see in the financial world and replicating that into this decentralized model. The DAOs will come, so that's just an entree into what we're about to jump into.
So that's a great segue. So let's talk about NFTs and smart contracts and options for legally papering them over. So Doug, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure, thank you. So yeah, that's great background, guys. One of the examples that I really like to use is a basic wager, a contract sustaining a basic wager between me and George. We're betting on the New England Patriots this Sunday. They're playing the Carolina Panthers in North Carolina. It's a win or lose situation. We're not going to include points. George picks the Patriots to win. We agree on something called an oracle, basically an information source that will confirm who won the wager, and we both agree that it's ESPN.com. So we will agree on that. We will deposit into an escrow account in an Ethereum token. And this escrow will open and flow the funds to the winner of the wager. So we instruct the oracle to be accessed at, I think it's a 1 o'clock start, so we'll instruct the oracle to be accessed by the smart contract at 7 p.m. Sunday evening. 7 p.m. Sunday evening, it pings ESPN.com. The Patriots won, that the funds are automatically released to George. That's a very simple kind of construct. And that's kind of where we are with smart contracts at this early stage. A lot of people call them dumb contracts. Information source I would highly recommend is anything that Lawrence Lessig has done over the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. He's very intelligent, obviously, and well versed in this. But a lot of people consider them dumb contracts because at this early stage, they're very rudimentary. Just that example, for example, a very straightforward arrangement that I have with George. The smart contracts, I've actually written a smart contract. I am not an attorney. I've done a proof of concept with the company I'm currently involved with. I created a smart contract through GitHub. GitHub has many templates that you can just populate, but again, very rudimentary at this early stage. Another perfect example of a smart contract usage would be flight insurance, right? For flight insurance, you're going to pick a travel website as the oracle. Is your flight delayed? Is it on time? That's a yes or no answer. If it's delayed, escrow account opens up, you receive the funding. There's no third-party interaction. So I think what this is going to do for the legal profession, it's going to allow attorneys to focus on much more complex measures. So just going back quickly to the wager example, we're not going to account for a meteor slamming into Bank of America Stadium Sunday afternoon at 1 p.m. You know, there's a 0.00001% chance that that's going to happen, right? It's not worth discussing. It's an outlier. That's one thing that smart contracts cannot account for. They can't account for the nuances related to that. Obviously, you're not going to negotiate what happens if a meteor hits Bank of America Stadium. But the smart contract at this early stage can't really distinguish. The other thing is that we're still, I think Daza mentioned, we're still very early, and the legal structure, I think, is having trouble kind of recognizing the power of these at this stage. So there's no comprehensive plugin. There is no Ethereum court to be able to kind of carry these smart contracts into deeper levels of complexity. Those days will come, but at this early stage, it's very rudimentary.
Doug?
Yeah, so one other quick example that I've been giving, and then Samina Cluck's in the back of the room, she's going to smirk at me, I've given for the last 5 years on smart contracts when it comes to like attorneys and what they're dealing with is, imagine this, so you're an attorney, well, one or two in the room, and you have to draw up a will or a trust. And you probably have never had to deal with that in your life. You're maybe in IP or whatever the case, technology, and someone comes to you, your family member comes to you and says, you've got to draw up this trust for me. Just please do it. You're an attorney, just do it. And you're like, fine, I'll do it. And so you draw it up, and it's a really silly will or trust. It says, upon the parent's death, they have 2 kids, kid A and kid B. Both kids have to be married upon the parent's death. If one kid is married and one is not, the kid that's married gets 100% of the estate. Silly, stupid, whatever. So that's drawn up, it's done in a PDF, right? You get people to notarize it, it's all set and good. Now, you codify that. So you translate that into various languages that are out there, Solidity, whatever. And from that, you could say, okay, what are the things that need to be checked through the oracle that we just heard about? Every day the computer says, let me check to see if both parents are alive. So it does for years and years and years, comes back through an API call to the oracle, trusted source, comes back and says, the parents have passed. Heartless goes on to the next task. Next task is, are both kids married? And does the same sort of call. It says, okay, are both of them married? One is married, one is not. For sake of argument here, all the assets are liquid, it transfers that, it releases it just as he describes it. So the smart contract is evolving. I've talked to a few insurance companies that are working on that sort of thing. But when you think about transactional attorneys and what they're doing in smart contracts and how this is all starting to bake into it, we had a KM discussions earlier, and someone was talking about what does 3 years out looks like for KM. To me, it's about smart contracts, and do you have the systems to be able to understand that, the code, the people to understand some of the contracts that are being built right now. All right, sorry.
No, this is great. Do you want to say something, Doug? No? No, sorry. Okay, so let's talk about that because they are very close to NFTs. So, options for legally papering them over.
Yes, thanks. So I'll pick it right up from that thread on insurance and trusts. And so let's take a look here. So I've got a slide here. So this is a good example. So I'd say the underlying question, I think, is what is the best way to be able to express everything we would want in a legal instrument for transactions that are being conducted over a blockchain, say through a smart contract of one kind or another. On the one hand, you could say, well, let's take more and more of it and build it into our, for example, Solidity code was mentioned as one of the ways that you program these smart contracts. At a certain point, you almost would need to replicate or do something comparable to an entire legal code and all the case law around it before we could start to mirror the likely complexity or the edge cases or not so edge cases that happen. And so another path that I have been exploring and that I invite you to consider is to use the smart contracts to mechanistically do parts of the transactions that they're really well suited to, which are things you can program that you want to automate, and then use legal contract or trust instruments or testamentary instruments or what have you, or copyright license instruments for parts where we actually do want to solve for a long range. Insurance contracts are a great example for a big range of different factors, and there's regulations that apply, disclosures, and a whole bunch of other things. So how do you do that? So in NFTs, here's an example. So a couple of months ago, I worked with Diana Stern, who's a terrific blockchain attorney, and we basically created a proof of concept that you could find at law.mit.edu, and if you just sort of click on media, it'll bring you to this one, NFT legal and licensing integration. This is a design pattern that can work for other smart contracts as well. And what we showed is when you're minting, what's called minting an NFT, you could actually integrate a reference to license terms, like for royalties, for example, if it's music or art, that would govern, and all of the edge cases. And then to complete it in the license, you then have a pointer back to the basically to where the NFT is encoded on a blockchain according to that standard. And that way you can sort of fill out the terms. So in an insurance contract, and if you want to see exactly how to do it, and we sort of do a page by page, you can click on the video and see the demo, but it's a design pattern. And so if you were doing an insurance, I was just on the phone with insurance industry people on a similar topic. The closest type of insurance would be parametric insurance, where basically the idea is when there's objective things that happen, we just mechanistically do a payout. But even there, you'll see there's pages and pages of boilerplate and things that need to happen. You could very similarly, or probate, you talked about a testamentary instrument. I'm probating, unfortunately, one of my parents' estates right now. A lot of it's edge stuff, but there's gonna come a time when we get where we're done with the notice period and it's time to do the payouts to everybody. Even that is a hassle. If we could just automate and escrow just all the payouts and the other parts that are clearly automated and allow people to contest the will or to figure out what happens if the asteroid hits AT&T or whatever in those edge cases through legal dimensions, I think we'd be pretty far ahead. So I would just close by saying a way to look is to find a way to successfully align and harmonize and then integrate legal terms with the smart contract terms to have a more complete envelope around transactions and make sure we get legal certainty about results in all the cases that we care about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tessa. So George. So let's talk about the future of blockchain and the implications for the legal profession and for all of our panelists. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Do attorneys need to know how to code in order to work?
So that's a really interesting question. So thank you. So I don't know how to code. So I have not written a smart contract, but yet I advise companies in the space because the law is still very undeveloped in this whole industry. So if you go to a different regulator, they define. I'm talking specifically about tokens, that are represented on blockchains. For example, the IRS considers it property. The SEC considers it a security. The CFTC considers it a commodity. And you can keep going. The regulators still don't know how to really regulate this thing, and it's causing a lot of disruption in the space, and you see a lot of companies leaving. But I think 3-4 years ago, I would go into the CFTC or the SEC, and I'd be talking about a specific project, and I would have to start at the beginning, right? It's like, well, here's a blockchain. Now I go in, and the level of sophistication within these agencies is really impressive at this point. Now the SEC is being led by Gary Gensler. He used to be a former MIT professor, and he taught blockchain. So, but one thing to focus that I find very captivating about the space and why I love being an attorney in it is because it's bringing about very basic questions that we thought were set in stone, right? Like, what is money, right? It turns out that if you tokenize your couch and people want to trade that online, well, now your couch is money. If you tokenize kitties, I'm sure you've all heard about it, that's money. Then now I'm sure at this point everybody's heard about the Howey test. What is that? It's a test. It's over 70 years old that defined what an investment contract is for the purposes of determining whether something is an investment contract and therefore security. That's now being brought back up from the dead, and it's being applied to determine whether these token issuances are investment contracts. So it's really bringing back to question, like, what is a security? What is a commodity? What is money? What is a transaction? And then the other beauty is it's disintermediating a lot of transactions that we're used to having somebody in the middle for. But that brings about the question that now Gary Gensler is asking a lot is, what is decentralization? At what point are you fully decentralized? Everybody wants to say, oh, I'm running a DeFi platform. Well, do I have an individual to whom I can send a subpoena? Gary would say if the answer is yes, then that's not decentralized, right? So we're still very early on with the legal here, and I think it's getting more sophisticated. And I think we'll see it develop in the coming years.
Yeah, I would just add just another information source out there. Gary Gensler taught a course on blockchain, and all of those courses are available on YouTube. Highly recommended. He really knows how to speak to it, and I may offend Daza with this comment, but he is a wolf in sheep's clothing. But that's another conversation. We can have that conversation another time. But yeah, I'm old enough to remember the world pre-internet, and I'm waiting for smart contracts to have their Netscape moment. For those of you that are kind of in my age range, searching for something on the web pre-Netscape was like writing code. Boolean operators, if, then, and, or not. It was insane, and you'd get nothing but garbage in return. Our Netscape moment for blockchain is coming. It's not here. So to answer the question, do you have to understand code? I would say, I don't think, again, I'm going to use me as an example. I wrote a smart contract using Solidity through GitHub by populating a template. So the fact that I can do it, pretty much anyone can do it. But I would argue we're not really at the point where you have to understand the tech to the degree that one would be completely comfortable using the technology. That day is coming. We will have a Netscape moment where it will be seamless. We've already seen that in the digital asset space. I transfer money cross-border all the time using an app called Abra. My relatives, if they're in Guatemala, I can send them basically what they see as the Guatemalan currency, what coming out at their end. I've used fiat currency, the US dollar on this end, but underlying the transaction is Bitcoin. Any family members that are receiving a transfer that I've sent have no idea Bitcoin was used. They don't understand crypto, they don't need to. All they know is that I transferred a certain amount in US fiat and it was transitioned into the Guatemalan currency. That day is coming for smart contracts. So.
I mean, the path forward to me is absolutely bonkers. The stuff that's about to happen that hasn't hit yet for everyone mainstream is off the charts. When we start to think about some of this stuff, and Facebook did me a bit of a favor, and I hate saying this, by talking about the metaverse, right? So the metaverse is around the corner. I know it sounds absolutely preposterous to even talk about, but think about this. So what was it, 14 years ago that we didn't even have an iPhone? So now we're touching this piece of glass all day long, and we're doing things all day long with that. The next thing is in the next 18 months, we should see at least 1 or 2 iterations of these goggles that we wear that we're gonna start to use for business as well as for fun. It's been there for fun for a long time, right? So that next step is that. Now, once you have that layer, everything inside that, as we start to spend more and more time inside that world for work as well as for pleasure, then the value starts to show up. So the clothing that I'm wearing inside that world, the contracts that I have with the people that I'm distributing the clothing, or the music festival that I go to, do I have representation of that as a token, a tokenized asset? All of that will have value. All of that's built on this blockchain, right? Various blockchains. So when attorneys come to me and talk about, like, do I need to code now? No, but I think that it behooves everyone to at least lean into the conversation, to start looking at these things. You're gonna get to the point where you don't necessarily need to code this stuff. I've done smart contracts myself, not a lot, but a little bit. And it's not terribly complicated, but it helps people start to think about things differently and how they approach things and how they ask of their clients, ask their customers, different questions to help wrap their own heads around what it is that they want to accomplish. So there's so much about to happen. It's gonna be fantastic to watch, but also scary.
Yeah. If I may just add to that, then I'll try not to go too deep because I always end up in a corner of a dark room just crying. It's like, the more you think about kind of where this is going, it's really interesting. But it starts back to what the purpose of blockchain was and what Bitcoin did that was so revolutionary is that it created digital scarcity by solving the double spend problem. Once you have digital scarcity, you can have digital value that can be transferred. You can own, for example, digital property. When Facebook announced their name change to Meta, there's a token, Mana, went up 100%, right? Because it shares the name, and all they do is kind of a digital world. Think of if you played Sims growing up or any time. Think about being able to put goggles on, actually owning that house and living there, right? Probably for cheaper. I always end up going back to the Matrix. It's like if you think about it long enough, the Matrix is almost an inevitability when you think through it. Right?
Excellent. Let's open up the room for questions. And I see, I'm sorry, I cannot, the light is too bright, but you had a question. Not anymore, we solve it. Any questions? Excellent. Oh, yes.
You want me to go to the mic? Or?
We can hear you, but I don't know if the people on the
Yeah,
online can hear
repeat
you or
it.
not.
Sorry.
Sorry.
So I think we heard you say that forward-thinking knowledge management departments should be getting prepared for a smart contract world. Is that correct?
I absolutely believe so, yes.
Right. So if you were the head of knowledge management for a fairly large-sized law firm, without disclosing any secrets, what would you do today, next year? Like, lead us through the next couple of quarters of what you would be doing, if you'd be so kind.
No small task. So what I would personally do is I'd get individuals on my team that were more inclined towards technology as in coding to get involved with, there's so many learning shops out there that are for free, that are available. I would start off with Ethereum because although there's many other blockchains out there that are coming along and the ecosystem will get stronger, have them learn about decentralization, smart contracts, how to potentially build that, to see what Daza was talking about in terms of the variabilities and the components inside of an NFT. It allows you to actually see what variables are important to that particular NFT. Why does it make it valuable? Why does it make it scarce? And so when they start to go around the corner and say, okay, this is actually fairly logical, it makes sense, it's code-based, they can then say, okay, what's next? When we have all of these contracts sitting inside of our firm or in the cloud, whatever you want to say, as they evolved into this next world, how are the oracles going to impact that particular contract? If something's changing and evolving because let's say it's a lease and it terminates, or it needs to automatically renew at a certain time, how do those contracts look? What's going to change within that space? So part of it's them getting their arms around this concept and the idea of decentralization and using the logic that sits inside of that, but it's also thinking, I guess, bigger and broader about the whole concept too.
Anyone?
Yeah, no, I would agree with what was said there. And one of the things that I like to compare smart contracts to is the early advent of the internet, in the sense that our first application on the internet was email, right? That changed the world. The first application on blockchain is cryptographic currencies. That's changing the world. And the next application is Ethereum, which is kind of a multi-dimensional Bitcoin. It's much more sophisticated. But I would say that if you can think about it in those terms, I'm not saying, you know, look at your knowledge management the way you incorporated email back in the day. But that is kind of maybe some kind of loose-fitting model that you could apply, and how email changed knowledge management.
And I'll add one other item, because I sometimes use that example as email. The next thing for this space is a wallet, a digital wallet. That's very different than what we think of, like, oh, Bank of America digital wallet. These digital wallets you take ownership of, like MetaMask is one of the popular ones out there. But it means that you own the private and public key. So for me, it's like that next logical step for people to understand, okay, if I'm going to have this wallet that's going to have these assets that sit on it, and I control it, government can, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, I'm a centrist, but like, the government doesn't control this, the bank doesn't control this, you as an individual now have ownership and asset control of that. So then how does that look like in e-discovery, in going after that space? How does it look on the contract side? So there's a lot of weird things that start to come into play when you start to look at it in that respect.
So would you agree with me, would any of you agree with me that connecting with what Stas said on the previous panel about needing to treat data as intellectual property, as an asset that you own, that the future of knowledge management is going to be getting the ability to reuse, buy, sell, even find sort of objects of knowledge, certainly at a more granular level than the document, and then do things with them using a blockchain-based platform?
So it's going to be a mixture, in my personal opinion. Clearly, you'll still have your public information, but I think a lot of this stuff's going to start to go privatized. So people will have more control over that. How do you get access to that? It's going to be a much more difficult thing, because the models of advertising are going to change too. So Google and Facebook are both going to be in somewhat precarious spot, because now that you own all of your information, you're an avid canoeer, you love the outdoors, you have this type of car, you own that information. If you want to then sell that, you opt into selling it to X, Y, and Z company that wants to market it back to you for a set period of time. And then once that's, you can disappear it through zero knowledge proofs, which basically obfuscates the knowledge thing that who is who, but you can prove that that person is who they are. That also is going to be kind of this transformative effect within knowledge management, because anything that's truly private is going to be far more difficult to get out. But the public stuff should remain probably the same.
Yeah, and kind of along those lines too, I think one thing that blockchain also allows is to monetize data. And the advent of micropayments, which we'll soon start seeing more of, allows for that, right? Before, you can't get a bank to send 3 cents to somebody, right? But now with blockchain, you will be able to. So if you write a blog post, for example, and you put it out, you'll be able to track who's read it and collect payment other ways. It just creates all new system, like financial models and ways to make money off of data, and also to keep it protected and limit the access to it, right? You could try sharding, you could, there's just different applications, and it's just, the one thing that I would say is, to your original question, is just wipe the slate clean. Whatever you know about the current system, see if you could rethink it, make it digital, what would you do different? And I bet you'd end up where you need to be.
Yeah, and I was just going to piggyback off that. The micropayment factor is massive. I do a lot of work in the developing world, and So take migrant laborers, for example, working in the Central Valley of California. They want to send remittance payments back to El Salvador, for example. They've been exploited for decades by the Western unions and MoneyGrams for the privilege of being able to send currencies cross borders. Now they can do it for pennies on the dollar. And just one quick blurb about smart contracts. This is going to have a profound impact on the developing world as well. I'm sure I don't have to tell anybody in this room that the legal systems in the developing world, for the most part, are completely either corrupt or broken. This will allow a legal sector to penetrate these developing economies and root out corruption. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, but it certainly gives investigators and other entities that are interested in either proving land title or making sure that these assets that are being sent to NGOs in the developing world are used for the proper reasons and not going into the wallet of some ruthless dictator. It's a huge game changer, and I think we're right on the cusp of really understanding what a big game changer it is.
And I just want to add, because you opened a can of worms as well, you know, so...
Sorry. It was Jordan's fault.
So, you know, years ago, just as an example to what you just mentioned, and I was talking to a friend, we were about to start our startup on Ether, precisely when the previous administration was considering banning the remittances from workers here to emerging countries as a way of pressuring those governments to stop the illegal immigration. So we saw that the remittances will not stop. They will just find a way of making it over the pond, and cryptocurrencies is the way. And also, I wanted to add to your prior question, like how legal firms can prepare. You know, I see it from my prior employer that was how I got specialized in blockchain and crypto, because for us, my firm saw it as in the beginning as a marketing, you know, thing. Like, well, you know, we can say that we have you know, people, professionals specialized in crypto and who understand blockchain, and that's how we started getting specialized. And now there are so many companies, many startups, many companies that do that my firm is effectively selling those services and getting good money per hour.
I wanted to talk about value of the tokens in the blockchain world. It seems to me that as you're discussing this, value is based upon the contract and the agreement between the parties. And if that's the case, you know, in contract law, there are certainly in many instances where the parties are considered not equals because of maybe capability or understanding or discernibility or whatever like that. How do you manage that sort of ethical implications in the blockchain world, where you may be dealing with micro tokens or with somebody who's maybe doesn't have great understanding of this, but they're working with a huge multinational insurance company that does have this sort of breadth and weight and understanding and complexity to them. Is that?
It's an interesting question, right? So going back to how these tokens acquire their value, a lot of it is just what people pay for them, right? And I think that's hard to understand for a lot of traditional financiers, right? They're like, we see all the statements everywhere. It's like they won't invest in Bitcoin because there's no underlying value, right? It's like if everybody sold their Bitcoin, it would go to zero. Whereas if everybody sold Ford, it wouldn't go to zero because they have assets. But there is knowledge asymmetries, I think what you were referring to when it comes to transacting in these tokens. And that's what regulators are trying to tackle. For example, the SEC is trying to tackle it by saying that the tokens are securities and therefore the issuers have to comply with all the disclosure requirements so that everybody's in the know. it's tough because once you assign it a security label, it creates a lot of different requirements that may not necessarily that could kill a project. There was also a proposal by the SEC, for example, for broker-dealers that want to custody digital assets and trade it for their customers. If you read that rulemaking, or I forgot, it was guidance, essentially the broker-dealer has to understand the technology such that it can identify the vulnerabilities in the blockchain, and then also advise their clients that to determine suitability. Very onerous requirements, and I believe that's why a lot haven't taken them up on it.
I can see a world, and it sounds like you guys certainly are moving in that direction, where all basic transactions, or even all complex transactions, are done through this immutable contract form, and then it means maybe the oracle is chosen by somebody who has great understanding, but it puts the other party in a difficult situation.
So I personally think that it's a leveling of the playing field, quite honestly. So there's two parts to this. One is there's 10% of the United States that doesn't have access to banks, either because they don't trust the banks or they just, whatever, don't want to deal with the banks. They can't get access to it, sorry. This would allow, and the federal government was about to do this in March of 2020. They were going to actually have everyone have their own digital wallet. And then they would be able to issue their money directly, so the funds, to people automatically. And that gets access to everyone. As long as you have a phone, you should have access to that. The other part of this is that what if you wanted to participate in the purchase of a $100 million building in Manhattan? Unlikely, at least for me, unlikely. I wouldn't be able to do that. But with the tokenization of this, and now the DAOs, those decentralized autonomous organizations that sit on top of that, it means that you can now participate in that. So it's almost like buying shares. It's not, but it's almost like getting shares in that and having ownership of that. And it sort of opens the door to many, many more people getting access to that sort of thing that you've never had before. That's the theory, the hope, and that's what's starting to play out. The last thing I'll say about DAOs is that this is my prediction. In the next 4 to 5 years, you're going to see a DAO own a major franchise, be it football, basketball. It'll be this thing that's all code that people have sort of, we'll call them shares, tokens, that they're allowing them to help make decisions on that. Do we want to buy this? Do we want to buy these players, right? So do we want these contracts? You'll be able to do that as an individual who has some of these tokens in their wallet. You will be able to help make that decision. So it's this crazy stuff that's about to happen that I think is very exciting. Clearly, probably too much for me, but we'll see if it comes true.
Any other questions? We still have a few minutes. Yes.
How you doing? Thanks so much. So I was looking at this sort of in the first sort of iteration you guys talked about, the first time around, taking my eyes off the block, so to speak, over the last couple of years. But one of the things that we struggled with when we were looking at it, especially around smart contracts, was understanding trusted oracles, and that so many of the oracles that we wanted to leverage were analog and not digitally consumable. I feel like that might be a hindrance or something that's going to slow down the advent of, because the way people think about contracts today, they're thinking about their traditional oracles, which aren't necessarily available. Do you see that changing, or conversely, do you see people inventing new ways to trigger contracts? And finally, are there companies out there that are thinking about turning those analog sources into digital oracles so they can be consumed by smart contracts?
Yeah, so the oracles are going to be extremely important for the development of the industry, and it's becoming an industry in and of itself where there's a lot of state mechanisms through which different platforms, if you want to act as an oracle, you'll have to stake a particular token or an asset that, and if you validate a wrong transaction, you get a penalty from that staked asset. In the inverse, if you get paid transaction fees for your work as a validator, and there's rating mechanisms by, if you've been in Oracle for this platform or for this blockchain for X amount of period and you've never had a wrong transaction validated, you get higher rating, kind of like an Uber, right? When you get your Uber driver, if it's a 4.7 or below, I don't get in, right? Same thing here. So an entire industry is developing around it, but there's plenty of companies that are actually thinking about it. Specifically for my company, which we're developing a hybrid decentralized exchange. One thing that we think is very important is that for individuals that want to trade these assets, that they maintain their own custody. I'm sure you've all seen the headlines of exchanges going down or people losing assets being frozen or their accounts being locked, CEOs just falling off the face of the earth. So we want people to be able to maintain their own assets, and so we'll provide this centralized matching engine where we'll put people together, but they'll actually settle on their own. But we're developing the technology for a settlement data oracle, essentially entities that stake our token, and all they do is just validate transactions and they monitor it. One thing that's really difficult that we're developing now is how to prevent oracles from working together to validate wrong transactions and essentially collude, right, and destroy the value that's there. So these are things that are actively being thought about right now.
I would just add to that, reputation is going to play such a bigger role of importance in the future. The example that I used about sending money to a relative in Guatemala City relies on my relative meeting someone at a Starbucks that they agreed to meet at, and prior to that meeting, the person who agrees to exchange Guatemalan currency with my relative has gone to the ATM to withdraw that amount. And the first question I get when I use this example, wow, what are you, crazy? You're gonna go to some random place and meet somebody who could mug you? And my answer to that is, are you gonna use Uber today? Because you're gonna be getting in a car with a stranger and they're going to be able to drive you anywhere they want to. So, and Uber and these average tellers who I'm illustrating here in Guatemala, reputation is so key, and the reputation can be, qualified on blockchain, so their reputation is pristine. So it really is not in their interest to be able to take advantage of the situation. So I think that's a huge part. Reputation is key.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Nadia, Joe, George, Doug, Daza, thank you so much. That was fantastic. All right, let's take